adding a second video to week 5 attendance. And by the way, if you didn't see my post in week 4 discussion, please check that out and ask me any questions. So in week 5, one of the things I realized in reviewing and thinking about last semester was that students at this point, and it's hard for me to say because I saw it show up in the review, didn't completely, especially those new, didn't completely understand return values, functions, global scope, and why we minimize variables on the global scope. Okay, so I just wanted to give you another example. In addition, I'm going to show you how to use DevTools, which I've been harping on DevTools for this course, and you'll hear me continue. But one thing I can tell you that made code reviews better for students, there's those who learned how to use DevTools. Okay, so I just have a simple main.js. I have my index set up. I have some comments so I make sure I cover everything. I'm going to talk about return values, how to use DevTools, and then minimizing global vars variables. Now, this doesn't mean we're using var, okay? It's just global variables. So we have two, basically what we call, two empty functions here, right? Add to and times 2. So there's a couple ways we've written already functions, and we've accepted input and returned values. But you really want to make sure at this point, just given this code, if I was to ask you one, like, does this code run? Does this code do anything? And the answer would be no. And now I have it up in DevTools here. There's no console output. There's no console command, but there's also nothing that runs, executes, calls. There you can hear it termed different ways, these two functions, okay? So let's actually write some code, right? So one thing you'd probably do, hopefully if you understood my variable discussion of when to, start with const, and again, that's important to understand. Use let. If you can't use const, don't use var. So if I said my input is equal to, let's say, 105, okay? So my input is 105, and let's say I wanted to first call add to, right? So then how would I do that, right? I would do add to, and now what would I pass into it, right? So in this case, I would pass the variable. Now, I don't have to, and I'll show you that in a minute, okay? But in this case, right, I'm calling it, but again, nothing's happening, right? Because even though, and by the way, this is where you can set this breakpoint, refresh the page, step through the code. So important that you know how to find these step points, okay? So I'm going to step into, and you can see that it's actually inside of this function, but because there's nothing there, right, it just returns. Now, it actually returns even though there's nothing there because of just the way JavaScript interprets this code. So now what if I said my input, right? What will happen there? Now at this point, because I have my breakpoint, it's still stopped on that breakpoint. It's not finished. So if I just wanted to say complete that, I could say resume execution, or I could just hit X, okay? Because you can see up here, it's going around and around. But I'll just go ahead and do this. And now what will happen is that it will, because of live server, it will automatically run because I've modified the code. And now we have an error. And we have an error, and this is a very common error that you will see, and it's my input is not defined. Now, this particular error stops, and this is what we call a hard error. This stops any execution of your code, okay? And I can prove this to you by coming up here and doing console.log, right, inside add to function, add to function, right? Again, because now I have a breakpoint set here, but let's actually take this off and hit let it execute, okay? And notice even without that breakpoint, and again, I could hit refresh here, I immediately get this, and this is not running because this error is stopping the execution of the program. And this is really where your dev tools is very handy, because your code, when you're over here and you're looking at it inside or in your VS Code, you're not going to see that error. And so understanding, oh, here, and again, this is a very common one. It tells you where it's at. And by looking at that, it may help you go, what's the issue is that you didn't camel case it. I didn't camel case it. Okay? That's one thing. You just want to understand that concept. Now, when we, and in this case, when we call add to and we pass something into it, right? If we don't then declare this as, right, and what I've talked about, the idea of arguments and parameters, you could just call this inputs if you want, as long as you understand that what we're passing to it, right, we're passing a variable that represents a number, in this case an integer. But if we don't actually give it a variable name here, it won't matter inside. We can't do anything with that value. Okay, so in there, right, I could call it anything I wanted. It's really up to me, and that whatever I'd give it a name of, it's actually declaring a variable that's going to be used inside of that function. So I could call it num. Now, could I call it my input? I could. But there are reasons why you may or may not want to do this. Okay, for one thing, you want to understand the idea of abstraction. Because sometimes, right, you're going to call, maybe you call this function later and it's not with my input, it's with something else. But what's going to come in, I would say, is a num. Now, it doesn't matter. X, Y, it does not matter what I put here. Long as I use it correctly inside of here now. Right? So now what could I do? Let's do this. Let's say const result equal to num, right, plus 2. And now in here, right, I could just console log out the num value or the result value. Now I'm not using template strings or anything like that, okay? But if I come back here, right, I can see I'm getting this here and it's showing me what line is actually creating that output right here, which is line 8. But really what you want to do is start watching your code run. Okay, so if I put a breakpoint here, I hit refresh, it's stopping the execution. I'm going to hit step. Now roll your mouse over and look that this variable has already been executed. Or sorry, this variable has already been declared and assigned. Okay, so it's been assigned the value 105. That's its variable. It's what it's holding that value. And so now when I hit, oh, by the way, over here, when you roll over num, it's not even declared yet. So if I hit step into, notice immediately it tells me now num is actually equal now to 105 because I've passed that variable in. Okay. And now inside of this function, I can now use the variable that I've passed in, okay, the variable value. And now I get, and again, this is where DevTools is so handy because it'll really help you understand. And now if I console log, boom, right? Okay, so hopefully you got that. But now if I ask you a question like, what if I wanted to use the result maybe in my next function call? What would I have to do here to do that? And one way we saw in the beginning of the class is we might have set up, right, a total, right, equal to 0. Now, again, thinking about would that make sense, right? Or could I put result here, right? Because this is block scoped, I absolutely could do that. Okay. And then I could use that because as soon as I execute this line, now actually, let's see, does this create an error? Think about this code before I execute it. Does it create an error? Okay. Let's actually go here, here, here. here, here, here. And by the way, this often happens when you keep going, okay? Because now it's just going to execute some other things and you can hit there. So why did it not create? Because we didn't redefine this variable right here. Matter of fact, this is a really good thing to think about, right? When we console log this value out here, check this out. If I console logged out, matter of fact, let's do it down here, right? If I come down here, after, actually let's do it here, after we've done it, console log out, right, result here. Okay, so now we're going to step in, we're going to call add to, we're going to pass in that, we've set up a variable inside the block scope, we've console logged it out, we're now back. Oh, it must not have got my latest code. So let's actually do this and hit this and refresh here, right? Oh. Oh, by the way, that is also, right, if you accidentally, I had an error in there. I didn't even talk about that, right? Boom, nothing else happened in my code because of that, because I accidentally put that in there, okay? So what I could do here is if I knew I didn't, like I already know that code works, right? Right now, we can look at the result. Actually here, because we haven't run the function yet, it's referencing back to the global. Now I don't want to confuse this too much, but one thing I could do is put my breakpoint here if I wanted, right? Just to see that run. But I think there's some benefit right now to seeing it run. So let's hit refresh, step into it, add to, okay, the result. Now because I'm inside of this block scope here, function scope, when I console log result, right, it is only within here. And now when I come back and I say console log result, because this is out in the global scope, which is part of the reason we want to minimize our variables on global scope, okay? So I would get rid of that, okay? So how could I do this? I actually am going to do this, and I have to do it in steps in order to both have the return value somewhere I could use. I will end up setting up a variable, but I'll show you after that step how we can. Matter of fact, you saw it when I set up my start function, right, in this week. But in here, I'm just going to give you another way of seeing it. So in this case, right, the other thing I would do is here is why set up this variable, because I could eliminate that variable, right? I could do, nope, eliminate that, just pass 105 there. But in order to use that value in this second function call, I need to do something like this. And I could do it by just saying return. I could even get rid of the variable declaration here. And I could just say return, which by the way, as soon as you have the return, this, if you noticed, it actually changed its color. And I did it a little fast. And I recommend for those of you new, write this. Because in this case, this line never gets executed, because as soon as it hits return here, it's going to return. Nothing executes after that. Now, returning something is great, but what? Okay, what can I use that, right? Can I console log result right now? Will it do anything? And this is at the point where the more you write, the more you read code, the better you understand. So add to, okay? So now I've passed in 105, and now I'm going to return. And when it gets here, it's going to say this is undefined. Because I took off this, but I returned something. But what did I not do? Here, I didn't do what? I didn't say const my result equal. And because I didn't do that, and I'm going to take this off because again, it's past the return point. Okay, so now let's say I want to now call, right, times 2. Could I do it? Could I say actually I could set up another variable, second result. There's better ways, but that's okay, right? And now I'd say times 2. But I don't want to, I want to actually pass the return value, okay? So in this case, I would pass the return value here. Whatever came out of there, now I'm passing to here. So now we have to think about, so first just look at that for a minute, right? Sorry, times 2. Okay. So I'm calling this, I'm getting the result. I then am setting up another variable called my second result times 2. I'm calling another function, passing the variable that came back by hitting the return. So in order to make this work, right, again, pass in a num, return num times 2. Okay. So if I have num times 2, then I have a second result. Then I could just say my second result. So this is how you can use return values for other function calls. And understanding that, right, is understanding the return values, understanding minimizing global. Now we haven't actually minimized yet. I'm going to show you how to write this in another way, but it's just another way of doing it that would eliminate. And that's where you could do the start function, right? Sorry, just start, right? And you could do, we're going to, here, I would take these two, so I'll take all 3, put it in here, then I would have no global variables. But what I'd have to do is call start. Okay? Now I could return something from here as well. But if I don't what? If I don't declare that variable out on the global scope, I can't use it anywhere else if I needed it. Oh, sorry. I still have to put the open and close parentheses, even if I'm not passing anything into it. Although here I could. Let's just first see this run. Okay, let's go ahead and let it finish. Let's let it finish here. Okay, so now I'd put my breakpoint on my start. I'd refresh. Again, it stops the execution of the page here. Okay, start. Calls. Now, by the way, this is also a very common thing where you have a function that calls another function. Okay. Right, so we have one function that calls start, calls another function, add to, returns a value to here, and then calls another function. Very, very common. Okay. Good. Now we see that 107 comes in. Now we're going to hit return times 2. So now we have a new result, 214, and now we could console log it. Right? And now we're done. Boom. So this idea of using learning dev tools, right? Again, if you get to this point, just let it run. It'll take care of itself. Get rid of that. Come back to your main right here. Okay. So just learning how to navigate, learning how to see errors, learning how to have your console, I actually got rid of it. I like to have my console setting here, is really handy. And one of the things I've seen throw students, especially when it comes to a code review, when I would ask them, how do I use a return value in another function call? And how do I minimize, or why do I minimize global variables? Because it is just not good memory management, and you can easily write over values. It's not well maintained. There's just a lot of reasons we want to minimize global variables. Now, I know this was a little longer, but I hope you check it out, and I hope it makes your coding better, because as I said, starting this week, right, I remove points if your code has errors, and definitely you should always be checking your code to make sure it works. Because just writing code is a good step, but writing code that works is really what you want to do. All right.